Erev Tov. Evening, everyone. So we have this week the story of Brit Ben Abtarim, where Kadosh Baruch Hu makes two great promises to Avram, two great promises for his future. He has the promise of the land which he'll inherit, and the promise of children of a great nation. We go through, we see how the Psukim describe both of these. Avram's reaction is slightly different based on each of these promises. The Torah tells us, Hashem takes Avram outside, whatever that means. He says, have a look at the sky. Go count the stars. See if you can count the stars, which obviously you can't count. And as numerous as that, this will be your children. You'll have many children, many offspring. At this time, Avram doesn't yet have any. And what's his reaction? He believed. Nothing unusual about that. I mean, that's what we'd expect from Avram. Hashem considered it tzedakah, the fact that he believed in this promise. I'm not going to talk right now about what that means. But then it continues. Promise number 2. Vayomer elav. Hashem says to him, Ani Hashem asher hotzeticha mi'ur kasdim. I am Hashem who brought you out of Ur Kasdim. Latet lecha et ha'aretz hazot lirishta, to give you this land to inherit. Vayomer Hashem Elokim bama eda ki Hashem. And Abraham says, how do I know? How do I know that I will inherit it? What's going on here? The first time he said, I'm promising you offspring, children. Abraham believed, as simple as that. I'm giving you land as well. Not so simple. I'm not so sure what's going on. So Rashi tells us over here the difference. Rashi says, Emin Bashem. The first time he says, Lo sha'alo ot al zot. He didn't ask for a sign about this. Aval al Yerushat ha'aretz sha'alo ot. V'amar lo b'me'eda. For the land, he asked for a sign. He asked, how am I going to know? It's one explanation. And then he says, another explanation. What was he asking? Not for a sign necessarily. He says, Davar acher b'me'eda. How will I know? Was Avram asking? Lo sha'alo ot, didn't ask for a sign. Ela amar lefanav, hodieni be'ezeh zchut yitkaimu ba. I don't know what merit will they continue to inherit it. As children, I believe you. I understand that I'm going to receive this land. How do I know that my offspring will continue to have the merit to have this land? What will their zchut be? Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'zchut hakorbanot. Says Hashem, in the korbanot they will bring the korbanot, and in that merit, they will still have, they'll bring the sacrifices. In that merit, they will keep the promise of the land. Okay, Ad Kan Rashi on the Chumash. The Gemara in Ta'anit explains to us a little bit more, the continuation of this conversation. We know that Abraham was not afraid to argue with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. We see it by the story of Sodom. We see it explicitly in the Chumash. But over here, the Gemara tells us that Abraham turns to Hashem and he says, okay, I understand they'll have the land at the time when, because of the zchut of the korbanot. That's fine at a time when they have korbanot, when they have the Beit HaMikdash. What about in the time when there are no korbanot? What about the time when there is no Beit HaMikdash? Then, Ribono Shel Olam, what merit will they have? So Hashem answers back. He says, don't worry. They have the parshiyot of the korbanot, they have the psukim, they have the Torah of the korbanot, which they can study, which they can read. And when they do that, I will consider it as if they'd brought them. And we find this idea in a number of other Gemarot as well. The Gemara Menachot tells us, why does it say Torat Chatat? And why does it say Torat Asham? Why is that word Torah used, describing his korbanot? It says, Kikol haosek b'Torat Chatat kilu ekriv chatat. Anybody who is anybody who's engaged in this parsha of the chatat, anybody who is engaged in these parshas of the korbanot, it's as if they've brought the korban. So the question is, and this question is discussed by the poskim, how far does this ke'ilu, as if they've brought it, how far does it go? Right? Not of such practical import right now, because nobody is going to bring a korban. But the question is this, and the poskim discuss, if, let's say, a person is in a situation whereby they would need to bring a korban. We need to bring a korban chatat. A person was Mechalel Shabbat, Doraita, B'Shogeg, whatever it was. When in the time of the Beit HaMikdash, the person would bring the Korban Chatat. Now we're not in the time of the Beit HaMikdash, therefore we can't bring the Korban. So what do? A person is obligated to bring the Korban. How do you get kapara? Gemara Shiur this morning we were talking about kapara, right? How do you do it? So if we say Kol ha'osek b'torat chatat ke'ilu akriv chatat, there's a possibility that if you go, you read the psukim, you learn it, that's as if you've brought the chatat, and that would then mean that hypothetically, when the Beit HaMikdash will be rebuilt, should be b'merav yameinu, then you no longer have an obligation. The slate is wiped clean. You've already brought your korban, so to speak, because you've read these psukim, because you've said it. Or do we say no? Ke'ilu akriv chatat, but when the Beit HaMikdash will be rebuilt, you still have an obligation. You'll still have to come and bring it. In other words, should we be keeping track? Should we be keeping a record so that we know one day how many we have to bring? So the first approach that we find in the poskim is that when it says Kol ha'osek b'torat chatat ke'ilu akriv chatat, it comes in place, and that's enough. Okay? All the poskim we discuss say it has to be done seriously. Meaning it's not enough, it's not a magical formula, it's not just a magic incantation. You mumble off the words without thinking, without knowing what you're saying. That's not enough. But the Mabid writes, the Shla writes, in fact, the Mishnah Berurah brings this. And the Mishnah Berurah discusses, he says, we don't just mean reading the words. The Gemara said, Kol ha'osek b'torat chatat. I mean, you have to be engaged, you have to learn the parasha, you have to have the kavanah, you have to have the intention, you have to understand what you're saying. The Mishnah Berurah brings the Magen Avraham, who says that when a person says, when you say korbanot, you have to stand up. In the same way, a person would stand when they brought the korban, because you're not just reading the words. It says, if right now you're bringing the korban, you're doing what you could. Discussion, the very first siman in the Torah, when he talks about when you read these psukim, you read these korbanot, should you say Yehi Ratzon with it as well? There's a Yehi Ratzon, which is printed in the Siddurim, which is in addition to the psukim about the chatat, about the asham, whatever korban, to say Yehi Ratzon, it should be your will, as if I have brought this korban. So he discusses that. And Torah says for the chatat, you shouldn't say the Yehi Ratzon. Why? Because if you're just saying it every day, and let's say you aren't obligated to bring a korban, you can't come along and bring one that you're not meant to. That's and therefore he says you shouldn't say it. Bach writes that because if you just say the psukim, that's like reading from the Torah. But if you say the psukim and you say the Yehi Ratzon, it's mamish as if you brought the korban. So therefore, he says you should be careful. If you know that you were meant to bring the chatat, then you can say. So that is one school of thought. We find that a number of poskim go in that direction. There are other poskim who say no. We know the word ke'ilu. We know what ke'ilu means, right? It's as if. In fact, the Ben Ish Chai brings proofs of this. He says we find a number of places in Chazal, not just in the modern vernacular, that this word ke'ilu means it's comparable, but it's not exactly the same. For example, the Gemara says, Kol ha'koes, anybody who gets angry, ke'ilu oved avodah zarah. It's as if they've worshipped idols. Okay? If we're now going to say that anybody who gets angry is mamish worshipped avodah zarah, a lot of us will have a problem. Right? We know all that means. Somebody who's like avodah zarah, it can't be very severe thing. But no, the Gemara is telling you there's a comparison. There's something. It's as if there's a certain common element, but it doesn't mean you've actually done that. And therefore, says the Ben Ish Chai, same thing. When you bring that, when you say the psukim about the korbanot, it's the best we can do. Right? We're living in a generation. There is no Beit HaMikdash. There are no korbanot. We can't do it. But the next best thing, and therefore it's ke'ilu ekrev chatat. And there's a very interesting proof from the Gemara, which the poskim bring for this opinion. It's the Gemara in Shabbat. And the Gemara says the following. There's a Mishnah in Shabbat that says, Lo yikra adam la'or anir, that a person on Shabbat should not read by candlelight. Okay, the candles in the days of the Mishnah were different to the wax candles that we have today. If you imagine, if you've seen, you have a little clay sort of pot, and the oil goes inside, and then there's a wick that goes in as well. And when the oil is getting low, the flame starts to flicker. So what people would do, one would tilt the candle so that the wick would draw from the oil, and then the light wouldn't flicker. Then it would you would have the light that you'd be able to see from. Now on Shabbat, that would be forbidden. Shabbat, one cannot, if one was to, you're causing it to burn, you're causing the fire, it's melacha of havara. And therefore, if one was to tilt the candle on Shabbat, that would be an Isur D'Oraita. So it says the Mishnah, say Chachamim, that not only are you not allowed to tilt the candle, you're not allowed to read by the light of the candle, because we're worried if you come to read that you will come to that you'll come to tilt. Okay, so the Gemara says, Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha, one of the Tanaim, says that he said no. There's a whole discussion in the Gemara whether this applies to everybody or whether it applies to an Adam Chashuv, to an important person. I'm not going to discuss now what the definition of an important person is, but an important person who wouldn't come to tilt the candle because it's beneath them, it's not a dignified thing. Be that as it may, but Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha says, I'm going to read because I won't tilt. So guess what happens? So there's actually two versions in the Gemara of the story. In version number one, it says that he was reading and he ubikesh lehatot, and he wanted to tilt the candle. And then he remembered it was Shabbat and he couldn't. And therefore says Rabbi Shmuel, Kama gdolim divrei chachamim. How great are the words of the sages, great are the words of the sages who said not to read because we would and because we would come to tilt. There are those who explain, by the way, that the sage in the Mishnah, it doesn't actually give the reason. In the Mishnah, it just says lo yikra l'orana. It doesn't say shema yatir. The Gemara adds in those words, adds in because you might come to tilt. And there are those who explain that what Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha was saying, when he said, "Come and gedolim divrei chachamim," is I came along and I rationalized based on the reason. And once I had the reason, and I said the reason doesn't apply to me, and therefore I can do this. And then he saw that the reason actually did apply to him. So he says, "Come and gedolim divrei chachamim," that in this case they didn't even give us the reason. They just said, "Don't do it," because they knew that if you're going to start rationalizing, you're going to start coming to make mistakes. But that's version number one. Version number two, the Gemara continues. Says Rabbi Natan, actually the story was as follows. Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha said, I'm going to read and I won't tilt. And he read and he tilted. And he broke Shabbat. And then what does he say? It says that he took out his pinkas. He wrote in his notebook, in his diary, whatever it was before smartphones. He wrote down that Ani Yishmael ben Elisha, when the Beit HaMikdash will be rebuilt, Ani avi chatat shmena. I'm going to bring a chatat offering. So this was clearly the story took place after the Korban. He couldn't bring a Korban, but he knew that he was chayav, so he wrote it down. So the question is, if we really say kol haosek b'torat chatat ke'ilu ekriv chatat, so why didn't he just learn the parsha, and that would have been enough? So the first Kim say no, that it's ke'ilu, it's the next best thing you can do. But when the Beit HaMikdash is rebuilt, you will still be required to come along and bring that chatat. Now the truth is, we don't find, aside from this Gemara, maybe one or two other indications of it, but we don't find any other stories of Tanaim, of Amoraim, of people, going around with notebooks and writing down how many chataot they have to have. We don't find people keeping a record. So the question is, why not? Shouldn't we be doing that? So I don't know. I was thinking maybe somebody, I'm sure at some point you'll develop an app and they'll start selling it that you can, track your korbanot. But until then, so a couple of different explanations given by the Rishonim Achronim. Why is it that Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha kept this record and others don't? So many say, which was a Sfat Emet, the Shla, a number of Farshim say, based on the story, that it would seem that one would be required to do this. Well, at least it would be a good thing to keep track. But they say that really Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha was a midat chasidut, meaning one's not strictly required to keep track of these things. There are those who say that when Mashiach comes, he'll come along and reveal to everybody exactly, we don't even know what are the things we've done right, what are the things we've done wrong. He will, with Ruach HaKodesh, come and tell everybody how many korbanot you're meant to bring, and that will be. But what's interesting, so they say that why did Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha Dafka take this midat chasidut upon himself? And why does the Torah tell us? And maybe the point is this. It means that in the story, what happened? Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha said, okay, Chachamim said, don't read by the lights of the candle, you might come to tilt. And he said, I won't forget. I can read because I won't forget that I have to not tilt and that it's Shabbat. And after he forgot. So it's midah keneged midah. In order to make up for that specific flaw, the specific mistake that he made over there was forgetting. Therefore says Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha, I'm not going to rely once again that I won't forget. but I'm going to write it down. I'm going to make sure that I know, and I'll bring that korban when it's required. Rabbi Kenigsberg Mincha Maariv Shiur